You make good money, you can cover the difference. That's just what family does. That's what my cousin Priya said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, sliding a check for $2,540 toward my side of the table. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and said nothing, because I already knew something none of them did yet. My name is Patricia Williams. I'm 34, and I've spent 11 years learning exactly what happens when people write checks their accounts can't cash. If you've ever sat frozen at a table while your family decided your silence meant agreement, stay with me, because I promise you it didn't mean that at all. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the vending machine. I'm an underwriter. My job every single day is to sit across from a stack of numbers and decide how much risk a person actually carries before something bad happens to them. I price exposure for a living. And somewhere around my 25th birthday, my family figured out that if you asked me for money the right way, wrapped it in enough warmth, I'd write the check before I'd even finished doing the math. Insert the guilt, collect the transfer. That's the machine they built out of me. 1 birthday loan and 1 wedding contribution and 1 just until payday at a time. I trained them to expect it. That part's on me. But a machine doesn't get to complain about being used exactly the way it was built to be used, so for a long time I didn't. There's a second thing that happened to me around the same time, a smaller habit nobody in my family ever named out loud, but everyone relied on anyway. I got good at making myself smaller in rooms where I was the one footing the bill, quieter at exactly the moments I should have been asking the loudest questions. The theory being that if I didn't take up space, nobody would notice how much of the actual cost I was quietly absorbing. My therapist has a word for that one too, though it took me years and a fair amount of her patience to accept it applied to me specifically. She calls it the shrinker. The part of a person that learns silence is the price to staying welcome at the table. I'd been paying that price at family dinners since before I could legally drink at them. Both of those habits, the vending machine and the shrinker, met at that table at Marrow and Vine, and for the first time in 11 years, neither of them got what it came for. The reunion was Priya's idea, held at Marrow and Vine, the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't list prices next to the fish. 12 of us. My cousin Priya Kessler had planned the whole evening, and Priya does not plan things quietly. She plans them the way other people throw parades. Her mother, my Aunt Carol Kessler, sat at the head of the table like she was presiding over something. My cousin Marcus Williams sat 2 seats down, already 3 drinks in. And near the end of the table, looking smaller than I remembered him, was my uncle Frank Williams, my father's younger brother. The one who used to slip me $20 at Christmas and tell me not to mention it to anyone. There was a version of that night that felt, for about 40 minutes, like the old version of us. Aunt Carol told a story about my grandmother's kitchen that made everyone laugh the real way, not the polite way. Uncle Frank asked about my job like he actually wanted the answer. For a little while, I forgot what these dinners usually cost me, in every sense of that word. The restaurant did its part too. Marrow and Vine sat behind a heavy black door with no sign out front, just a small brass number. And inside it was all warm, low light, dark green booths and candles set in thick glass jars that made the whole room smell faintly of cedar and burnt sugar drifting in from the kitchen. Someone's cashmere scarf kept slipping off the back of a chair. A server refilled the sake carafes before anyone finished the first round. It was the kind of room built to make an evening feel like a success before the bill ever showed up, and for 40 minutes it worked on me too. I remember watching my grandmother's old rosewood bracelet catch the candlelight on Aunt Carol's wrist, and thinking maybe this was the year the dinners went back to being simple. I should have known better. In my line of work, the calm before a claim is never actually calm. It's just the part where nobody's looked at the paperwork yet. Then the food started arriving, and it didn't stop. Platter after platter. Priya had ordered off-menu, she told the table proudly, a chef's selection she'd arranged over the phone the week before. Nobody asked what that would cost. Nobody ever asks at these dinners, until the number is already sitting on the table in the form of a check nobody wants to look at directly. 90 minutes later, 12 of us had gone through what the waiter later confirmed was $2,540 of sushi, sake, and a dessert course somebody ordered without a vote. The check landed in the center of the table the way a verdict lands in a courtroom, and everyone found something urgent to look at that wasn't the check. Priya looked at me first. That's when she said it, the line I already gave you. You make good money. You can cover the difference. That's just what family does. She said it like she was doing me a favor, letting me participate in something generous. Aunt Carol nodded along like a woman confirming a fact everyone already agreed on. And Marcus, without missing a beat, added his own version, the one I'd heard from him at my cousin's wedding 2 years earlier, almost word for word. Come on, Renata, it's not that deep. Family takes care of family. 2 people, 2 different nights, the exact same phrase. I noticed that. Filing things like that is most of what I do for work. I picked up my water glass. I took a slow sip, and I said nothing, because 3 days earlier, my phone had rung at 11 at night, and it was Uncle Frank, and he was not calm. Let me take you back those 3 days, because the panic didn't start at the table. It started before anyone even sat down. Uncle Frank had called me the way people call you when they've already made a decision, and now they need someone else to absorb the consequences of it. His voice had that thin, high edge that scared adults get, the one that makes you realize the person on the other end has been rehearsing the sentence in the mirror for at least an hour before they finally dialed. I could hear a television playing low in the background, and somewhere behind that, the specific hollow quiet of a kitchen at 11 at night when nobody else in the house is awake to hear you panicking into a phone. I messed up, he said before I'd even finished saying hello. I need to tell you something before tomorrow, and I need you not to be angry at me. He told me that he'd agreed to put down the deposit for Priya's reunion dinner, $400 on his card, because Priya swore she'd have the rest covered by the group before the bill came. Except the deposit had bounced. His card had been declined at the restaurant that afternoon during the prepayment call, and the manager had told him, politely but clearly, that if the balance wasn't resolved by the night of the dinner, they'd be handling it as an unpaid tab, the kind of thing restaurants don't forget about a family that keeps making reservations under the same last name. I don't have another $400 right now, Renata, he said, and I heard something in his voice I'd never heard from Uncle Frank before, something that sounded almost like shame. Priya said you'd help sort it out if it came to that. She said you always do. She said you always do. I sat with that sentence for a long moment after I hung up. Here's the part that's hard to admit. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was the old instinct, the vending machine instinct, the one that already had my banking app open before I had even decided to open it. I could feel my thumb moving toward the transfer screen out of pure muscle memory, 11 years of practice, before some other part of me, a newer part, asked a single quiet question. Why does Priya know exactly what I always do, before I've even said I'll do it? That question is the whole reason I'm telling you this story. Instead of transferring anything, I did what I actually know how to do. I pulled the paperwork. Not metaphorically. I called the restaurant myself the next morning, told them I was a member of the reservation party, and asked, politely, exactly how the deposit had been structured. And the answer wasn't what Uncle Frank had described. The deposit hadn't been charged to Uncle Frank's card at all, not the way he thought. It had been charged to a card ending in the same 4 digits as mine. A card I hadn't used in over a year, one I'd stored on a shared family document 18 months earlier, back when that felt like something family members were allowed to ask of each other without flinching. I sat in my kitchen that morning with my laptop open, a cold cup of coffee going untouched beside the keyboard, and read the confirmation email the restaurant forwarded me twice, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My card. My name on a deposit I never authorized, for a dinner I hadn't agreed to pay for, on a reservation nobody had asked me about until the bill came due. The email even had a timestamp on it, 11:40 at night, 3 weeks earlier, long before anyone had mentioned the reunion to me at all. Uncle Frank hadn't been lying to me. He'd been lied to himself, told his card covered it when it never had, so that if anything went wrong, there'd already be a story ready, one that ended with my name on it and nobody having to ask me directly. That moment, the ambush stopped being a feeling and became a fact I could hold in my hands. I want to name something here, briefly, before I go on, because it's the first real thing this whole mess taught me. In underwriting, we have a term for a claim that looks clean on the surface, but was quietly loaded with risk before anyone signed anything. We call it a pre-existing exposure, damage that happened before the policy even started, dressed up to look like something that occurred on your watch. That's what this dinner was. Priya hadn't ambushed me at the table. She'd ambushed me 18 months earlier, and the table was just where the bill finally came due. I'd spent so many years assuming the machine in me broke down at each individual dinner. It didn't. It was rigged long before I ever sat at the table. I decided, sitting there in my kitchen, that I wasn't going to transfer a single dollar to fix a card I never authorized. I was going to go to that reunion, and I was going to let the math do what math does when nobody's paying attention to it. That afternoon, I called my friend Jordan Ellis, who I'd worked next to for 6 years before she moved to a different floor of the same building, and told her the whole thing over a rushed lunch in the break room, the kind you eat standing up because sitting down would mean admitting how long this was going to take to explain. Jordan doesn't do warmth for its own sake, which is exactly why I called her instead of my mother. She listened to the whole story without interrupting once, then asked a single question. What does the paper trail actually show? Not what Frank thinks it shows. That question is the reason I called the restaurant back a second time that same afternoon and asked them to email me the full authorization record, not just the confirmation, the actual form data attached to the deposit. I also called my therapist, Naomi Cole, 2 days before the dinner, mostly because I could feel the old instinct creeping back in, the one that wanted to just quietly pay the difference and avoid all of this. Naomi asked me what I was actually afraid would happen if I didn't. I told her I was afraid of the version of the night where everyone at that table looked at me like I was the problem. She said something I kept turning over on the drive to the restaurant 2 nights later. You've confused being the one who pays with being the one who's loved. Those aren't the same job, even though your family has been billing you for both. So there I was, 3 days later, holding my water glass, watching Priya wait for my usual answer. I set the glass down. Before anyone splits anything, I said, can we get the actual itemized check, and can someone call the number on the reservation confirmation? I want to see how this deposit was structured. The table went quiet in a way that told me everyone had expected a different Renata to show up tonight. Someone's chopsticks clicked against a plate. The last candle at the far end of the table had burned low enough that its flame kept catching the edge of a napkin folded too close, and nobody moved to fix it. I'd spent the drive over rehearsing exactly this moment, the redirect, the part where I didn't hand them the fight they expected. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to list every dollar I'd ever quietly covered at every dinner before this one. I was just going to ask for the paperwork, calmly, the way I ask for paperwork every single day of my working life, and let the numbers do what numbers do when you finally let them speak for themselves. Aunt Carol tried first, gentle, the way people are gentle right before they escalate. There's no need to make this complicated, sweetheart. We're all family here. Then Marcus, louder, less gentle. Jesus, Renata, it's dinner, not an audit. And then Priya, sharper than either of them, the entitlement finally showing its full shape. You've always been like this, making a simple thing into a whole production, when all we're asking is for you to pay your fair share like everyone else at this table. Except I hadn't ordered off menu, I hadn't picked the restaurant, and I certainly hadn't authorized a card I stored for my grandmother's flight bookings to guarantee a $2,500 tab for a party I found out about the same week everyone else did. The candle on our table had burned down to a small pool of wax. By then, somewhere behind me, a server dropped a fork, a small bright clatter that made half the table flinch. Nobody laughed at it. The room had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with volume. I asked the waiter, a young man named Theo, who'd been quietly refilling water glasses all night without saying a word about the tension building at his table, if he could bring the manager over. He'd been hovering near the service station for the last 10 minutes, close enough to read the room, far enough to stay out of it, the exact posture I remembered wearing myself years ago when I waited tables through college and watched families detonate quietly over checks that were never really about the money. He looked, for just a second, like someone had finally asked him a question he was allowed to answer honestly. "Of course," he said. "I'll get her." Something in the way he said it told me he'd clocked exactly what was happening at this table long before I asked him to. While we waited, Priya kept going. This was her second escalation. "I already told everyone you'd handle the difference. That's what I said when I booked it." A confession delivered like it was still an accusation. Then came the third voice, the one I hadn't expected to turn on me, but by then I understood why he would. Uncle Frank, quiet until now, said, almost pleading, "Renata, please, just this once. My card already got declined once tonight and I can't have it happen again in front of everyone." 3 different family members, 3 different angles, all pointing at the same door, and every single one of them expecting me to be the one who opened it. I looked around the table while I waited for Theo to come back with the manager. Marcus had gone back to his drink, avoiding my eyes now that his opening line had landed badly. Aunt Carol was watching Priya more than she was watching me, the way a director watches an actor mid-scene, ready to feed a line if one got missed. And Uncle Frank kept glancing toward the door, like he was hoping Denise would take her time to getting to us, giving the whole table one more minute to fix this quietly among themselves before an outsider had to get involved. Nobody else at the table said anything. 6 other cousins and an aunt I barely spoke to outside of these dinners sat in careful silence, the kind of silence that isn't neutral no matter how much it wants to look that way. I understood, watching them, silence had been my job for 11 years, and I was only now realizing how many other people at that table had been quietly doing the same job for just as long, just aimed at different targets. Here's the small thing I want you to sit with, the thing I only understood weeks later. Every single one of them said just this once. Not one of them noticed they'd all said it before. The manager came over a minute later. A composed woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Denise, a tablet tucked under one arm like she'd done this exact walk to an exact table more times than she'd ever admit to a customer. She had the calm, unhurried manner of someone who had diffused far worse than a family argument over sushi, and she pulled a chair close to the table's edge rather than standing over us, which I noticed and appreciated more than I expected to. I asked her, in front of the whole table, whether she could confirm which card had guaranteed tonight's reservation, and whether that card was currently on file for tonight's balance as well. Denise didn't hesitate. She pulled up the reservation on a tablet and read the last 4 digits out loud, my digits. Then she tried, at the table's request, to run the balance against Uncle Frank's card as backup, the one everyone insisted was the real guarantee, the one Priya had sworn covered everything. It declined. She tried again, a manual retry this time, patient, professional. It declined a second time. 12 people at that table went very quiet, and for the first time all night, nobody was looking at me. I want to be honest with you here, because I promised myself I'd be honest telling this story. There was a small, sharp piece of satisfaction in that silence, and I'm not going to pretend there wasn't. But underneath it was something bigger, something closer to grief. Watching 2 declines confirm in real time exactly how much of tonight had been built on a story I was never told the truth of. I asked Denise one more thing, whether she'd be able to confirm, on a recorded line if needed, that the original deposit card ending in my 4 digits had never actually been authorized by me for tonight's dinner. She said she could call the payment processor directly to verify the authorization on file, right there, in front of everyone, if that's what I wanted. I said yes. She dialed. She put it on speaker at my request because I wanted every person at that table to hear it in real time, not summarized by me later, not softened by anyone's memory of the evening. A representative confirmed in about 90 seconds that the authorization for the deposit had come through an online form filled out using my card details and my name, but the contact email attached to that authorization wasn't mine. It was Priya's. The manager came over a minute later, a composed woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Denise, a tablet tucked under one arm like she'd done this exact walk to an exact table more times than she'd ever admit to a customer. She had the calm, unhurried manner of someone who had diffused far worse than a family argument over sushi, and she pulled a chair close to the table's edge rather than standing over us, which I noticed and appreciated more than I expected to. I asked her, in front of the whole table, whether she could confirm which card had guaranteed tonight's reservation, and whether that card was currently on file for tonight's balance as well. Denise didn't hesitate. She pulled up the reservation on a tablet and read the last 4 digits out loud, my digits. Then she tried, at the table's request, to run the balance against Uncle Frank's card as backup, the one everyone insisted was the real guarantee, the one Priya had sworn covered everything. It declined. She tried again, a manual retry this time, patient, professional. It declined a second time. 12 people at that table went very quiet, and for the first time all night, nobody was looking at me. I want to be honest with you here, because I promised myself I'd be honest telling this story. There was a small, sharp piece of satisfaction in that silence, and I'm not going to pretend there wasn't. But underneath it was something bigger, something closer to grief, watching 2 declines confirm in real time exactly how much of tonight had been built on a story I was never told the truth of. I asked Denise one more thing, whether she'd be able to confirm, on a recorded line if needed, that the original deposit card, ending in my 4 digits, had never actually been authorized by me for tonight's dinner. She said she could call the payment processor directly to verify the authorization on file, right there, in front of everyone, if that's what I wanted. I said yes. She dialed. She put it on speaker, at my request, because I wanted every person at that table to hear it in real time, not summarized by me later, not softened by anyone's memory of the evening. A representative confirmed in about 90 seconds that the authorization for the deposit had come through an online form filled out using my card details and my name, but the contact email attached to that authorization wasn't mine. It was Priya's. I didn't hear from Priya again for 6 weeks. When I did, it came through my mother, secondhand, the way most difficult truths in my family travel. Priya had told her own version of the story at first, the version where I'd embarrassed her in public over an honest mistake. That version lasted about 2 weeks until Aunt Carol, of all people, finally corrected it. Not out of loyalty to me, but because Denise had followed up with a formal letter about the unauthorized authorization, and Carol didn't want that letter finding its way to anyone who might ask her direct questions about her own role in it. Marcus texted me once, 3 months later, something short and almost sincere. He said he was sorry for piling on that night, that he hadn't known about the card until after, and that he should have asked more questions before he opened his mouth. I believed him, mostly, the way you believe someone who's telling the truth about a small thing to avoid telling the truth about a bigger one. Uncle Frank called me again a few weeks after that. This call was different from the panicked one. His voice was steadier, and there was something in it I hadn't heard in years, something that sounded like him actually seeing me instead of seeing what I could solve for him. He apologized, plainly, without asking me for anything in the same breath, which was new. He told me he'd finally understood, sitting with it for weeks, that Priya's story about his card covering everything had never made sense once he actually looked at his own statement, and that he was ashamed it had taken a stranger named Denise reading numbers off a tablet for him to admit that to himself. He asked if we could get coffee sometime, just the 2 of us. No reunion, no reservation, nothing that needed guaranteeing. I told him I'd like that. My mother, for her part, mostly stayed out of it, the way she stays out of most things involving her sister's side of the family. But she did tell me once, almost offhand, that Aunt Carol had asked her, weeks later, whether Renata was still upset. Not whether the actual thing that happened was wrong, whether I was still upset about it, like the upset was the actual problem that needed managing, and the unauthorized charge was just weather that had passed through. Priya never called. 6 months later, I heard through my mother that she'd tried the exact same maneuver at a different family gathering, my cousin's baby shower, using a different relative's card details pulled from the same shared document, the one meant for booking my grandmother's flights. That one didn't work either. Word travels fast in families once somebody finally says the true version of it out loud in front of everyone.
Family takes care of family. I still believe that sentence, more than I ever did before that night. I just no longer believe it means what my family used it to mean for 11 years. I think about that dinner sometimes. Not the confrontation part, but the 90 minutes before it, when the food kept arriving and nobody asked what it cost. I think about how long I sat inside that same pattern without noticing it had a name, without noticing that a family can run the exact same math on you for years, the same way a bad policy can run quietly for years before the claim finally comes due. I don't regret the 11 years. Not entirely. I think they taught me exactly what I needed to know to stand still that night, instead of reaching for my phone. I just wish I had learned it somewhere that cost me less. Before you go, I want to leave you with something real, because that's the whole reason I tell these stories. What happened to me that night has an actual name, and it happens more often than people realize. It's called card not present authorization fraud, and the version that happens inside families is almost never treated as seriously as it should be, because everyone involved assumes love makes it a misunderstanding instead of what it actually is. If you've ever stored your card details anywhere for a shared family purpose, a flight, a gift registry, a group trip, that information doesn't disappear once the original reason for sharing it is over. It sits there, available to be reused unless you go back and revoke it. Most people never think to. I didn't either, until a manager named Denise read my own card number back to me in a restaurant that smelled like burnt sugar. If your bank or merchant flags an authorization you don't recognize, you have the right to dispute it directly with your card issuer, and you don't need the other person's confession to do it. You need a timestamp, a transaction record, and your own clear memory of never having said yes. The chargeback process exists specifically for exactly this kind of situation, family or not, and it doesn't require you to prove intent, only that you never authorized the charge. Most issuers give you 60 days from the statement date to file that dispute, and once it's filed, the merchant carries the burden of producing your actual signed authorization, not the other way around. I'd also tell you this, because nobody told me. A card number sitting in an old shared document doesn't expire because the reason you shared it did. Go back through your email, your family group chats, any shared spreadsheet used for a wedding fund, a group flights, or a shared gift, and look for anything with your card details still sitting in it. If you find something, remove it today. Not because you expect the worst from the people you love, but because the option to misuse it shouldn't still be sitting there quietly waiting for someone to notice it. Tell me in the comments if you've ever found your information sitting somewhere.